Welcome. I am Diane Darling, and I am so lucky to meet amazing people. And one of the amazing people I want to introduce you to is Anne Partington. And she and I are a part of an accountability group that gets together at 6:30 in the morning. Yes, you heard that right. We get together at 6:30 in the morning. She and I have never met in person, but over the course of some of our conversations about getting to know each other, she has an amazing background in supply chain management. And I mentioned to her the other day in our conversation that I had done some teaching at MIT to their supply chain management students. So students and anybody else who wants to listen in, because we're going to pop this on YouTube, you're going to have a chance to listen to Anne and I talk about what is supply chain management, what are some of the challenges it faces. Right now during the pandemic, people are talking about medical supplies. Where are those gloves? Where are those gowns? Where are those ventilators? So please join me in welcoming Anne. Hello, Anne. How are you?
Hi, Diane. It's so nice to be here. I'm doing well as can be during a global pandemic.
As well as can be during a pandemic. So give us a little bit about a background, about your personal background, and then we can talk specifically about supply chain management. Tell us about you.
Sure. So I probably have a fairly atypical background for a supply chain management professional. I spent about 20 years in the automotive industry in various roles across product development, across program management, both on the technical side and in purchasing, and then in global purchasing. And over that time period, I've really developed a love of innovation and how it ties in to the work that we do every day. So by education, I am an engineer. And I would also say that I'm a very creative and people-oriented person. And I've watched the progression of the automotive industry sort of transition from, very commodity-based into technology and evolution of that technology and our customer needs and wants, and how the automotive cockpit has really become a consumer experience. So it is a really exciting time to be in the automotive and mobility industry. And about 9 months ago, I made the leap to go work for a regional nonprofit economic development engine that specializes in entrepreneurial startups to business development. And so I've been really enjoying that experience and working sort of on the other side of this space and really understanding what is happening in the innovation and startup community.
So I want to step back. What made you decide to become an engineer?
Well, 2 decades ago, if you were good at math and science and you had, a teacher that sort of believed in you, then they would say, well, you could be an engineer. And so thinking back on that, I always liked solving problems. I wanted to know how things worked. I was the kid at the bottom of the ladder while my dad was working on something saying, can I climb up there too and help? Could I help with taking the dishwasher apart? How does this work? And can we put it back together in a different way? And who cares if it doesn't work the same way? Maybe it'll do something better or different. So I've always had that sort of creative mindset in understanding how things work today, but also what could this thing be tomorrow, or what might those needs be tomorrow, and using that imagination and creativity into sort of looking out into the future.
I want to ask, if you will, a bit of an obvious question. We're women, and my dad went to Caltech, and I was always taking things apart. I'm thinking a little bit, remorsefully that I didn't follow that. I think it was interesting, but I wasn't encouraged. Was there somebody who encouraged you as a woman to go ahead and go into, frankly, a very male industry?
I would definitely say that my parents were very great proponents in recognizing their kids' superpowers. And, each one of us has a special characteristic or gift that we have inside of us that's very innate. And for me, it was sort of working around logic and math and understanding how things work, but also how people think. My parents, particularly my dad, who was definitely a huge motivation for me, I wanted to be a civil engineer and help with designing buildings and get into sort of the architecture space. And he kind of encouraged me more to look at computer engineering, where I started, but my heart was still sort of in the physical space, so I transitioned to mechanical. But I think having mentors, particularly teachers and strong female mentors, are very important so that women and men can really strive and thrive in those STEM fields, because we need the talent.
A friend of mine, I haven't seen her in a while, she might be in her late 60s, early 70s by now. And she got into MIT, and she said she had to decide where she was going to not fit in the least. Did she go to MIT because she was as smart as the students, but female? Or did she go to another school and fit in as a female, but was going to be bored because of her intellect? And she ended up going to MIT, and her name's Pat. And so she didn't put Patricia on all, and these are back in the days before LinkedIn. So she would get these interviews and show up, and they were all surprised to see, oh, you're a girl. And she did very well. But I haven't spoken with her in a while, and this conversation is making me think maybe I'll do a quick shout out. So let's walk through, you become this engineer. How does then that take you to working in an automotive space? And then how does that take you to supply chain management? And, what is supply chain management? Do you have a definition that you share with people outside of the industry?
Just walking through the history really quickly, I started on the line working in manufacturing for my very first assignment. And I got the bug because I worked in body sealing. So imagine those weather strips that seal your vehicle doors. And, you may not think of those as being very glamorous, but when you're listening to your favorite song and you're driving down the freeway and you hear this wonderful whistle of wind sort of take over that music, that is a customer annoyance of great proportions. And so even if your vehicle is absolutely perfect, elements of body sealing in that vehicle are absolutely critical for the customer experience.
So true. It's so true.
And working with folks on the line and understanding, how do you install those weather strips and why is it so important and how do we get it right for the customer the first time really gave me the bug on tying together the bigger picture around what automotive can do for consumers, and that every job that you could have in that space really does have an impact for the end use customer. And so from there, I went on to product development, did the jobs like working in validation and safety, and learned about what happens to a small child versus a 5th percentile female to a 95th percentile male who is 6'6", and how do you design a vehicle so that it's safe for the majority, and then continued on to roles that had to do more with perceived quality. And then I was asked to go over to purchasing, and they were looking for folks that could have that technical experience and mindset and bring that to the table in a business setting where networking and relationships and building long-term pipelines with suppliers and internal customers, your cross-functional teams, and then working globally and sort of balancing the local requirements and the local goals and metrics versus what you need to accomplish as a corporation really then continued to sort of build in me this great understanding that supply chain can be much more than just going out and purchasing a part, right? And sometimes you hear people say, well, oh, that's just a widget or a small fastener or something like that. But when you are building a vehicle with thousands and thousands of parts, every component becomes critical, because if it's not there on time to the right specification, that vehicle will not make it off the line. And the ramifications for cost or customer availability, etc., is huge. And we've seen that, and we can probably touch on this, I'm sure we'll touch on this further, is sort of with the current situation around COVID-19 and PPE availability. So when you talk about supply chain as a whole, there's many aspects to that. There's the early strategy, sourcing, sort of development, pre-development work that occurs with suppliers in conjunction with internal customers. And then there's the sourcing process. And then there's, of course, the milestones that go around how do we achieve our financial goals for the year, and how does the procurement organization, what part do they play in that? And then, also moving into the demand and supply side, and how do you manage that? When you think about automotive, the way customers purchase vehicles in the States, where they walk into a dealership and say, after 30 minutes or 40 minutes, they've looked at a vehicle and they decide this is the one. Well, not everyone in the world buys vehicles that way. Some folks will actually order vehicles in different regions, and there's a different lead time. So, there's a lot of thought process that has to go into sort of the global supply chain and purchasing world. And then also thinking about the technology roadmap. How do those things shift in the existing shell of a vehicle? Where can you make changes and bring in new technology without affecting sort of the architecture of the vehicle? And where do you have to think about the next generation, implementing that and getting that developed off the shelf so it's ready to sort of plug in? So there's a lot of different aspects. And as you can tell, I'm extremely enthusiastic about purchasing. I love it. I just think there's so much opportunity for creativity. It's not just a metrics-based profession. And that space of creativity and innovation and having supply chain be a leader and enabler with the right partners to bring in those technologies to serve our customers and help meet those business metrics is a huge opportunity for anyone that goes into this profession. So yes, I am an advocate.
Talk about the person who saw your success and said, did you want to move into purchasing? You don't have to name them, but did you bump into them at the cafe? Did you meet them on a baseball team? Were they somebody who was in your onboarding when you were first starting, with the organization? How do you build those internal customers? That's one thing that I talk about a lot when I teach networking. People so often think about networking as to get a job. Well, how do you succeed at your job? You got to know who inside is the person. And yes, you need to bring in customers, but if you're not in a sales team, how do you build that internal team? Can you talk about that person and maybe a little bit of that story?
Sure. So I had always sort of talked about the big picture. And at that time, I was in a job that had to do with human factors of the entire vehicle and as well as perceived quality. And I always wanted to understand better, what are those elements that drive those big picture decisions on, are we going to build the next new architecture? Are we going to build this vehicle? How are we going to build this? What is the content going to be, etc.? And I actually, Diane, had a different role in mind. My thought process was that I would go into strategic planning. And so this was around the time period where we had the last big downturn back in 2006 and 7 and 8. After going through the process and I had been offered a position, I got a call. And the call was, hey, they'd love to have you, but this organization needs you more. And would you consider going to purchasing? I went and interviewed with 2 very intelligent and strong women who were working in purchasing. And they talked to me about the importance of bringing in technical talent and being a female leader in that space. And I have a real love of getting things right for the consumer. And this was an opportunity to work in safety and work on, amongst other commodities, sort of the steering wheel and airbags and things that, are really important to customer interface and experience in the vehicle, but also that safety component. And it was a global position. And so I was sold. And being with these 2 women who were extremely motivated to do the right thing, passionate about their jobs, very confident in what they were doing, but open-minded enough to say, we are continuing to look for creativity and new members to our teams that can help create diversity of experience and bring in that diversity of thought, was really the driver for me to make that leap. So years later, looking back, I think it was exactly the right move for me, although I still have, that bug of wanting to someday spend some time in strategic planning.
Strategic planning is fascinating. I mean, I'm working for myself. I have to do my own plan, which is hard, but I think there is something fascinating about puzzling all of those things together and bringing something like that together. Talk about building teams and what you looked for joining a team when you were starting out, and what advice you would have for MIT students or any student or any person who was looking at managing a team.
It's all about the team, the team, the team, the team. So when I look for a team that I'm joining, I'm looking for key factors such as how does a team embrace new members? What is their sort of their vision and mission? What are they trying to accomplish? And how could I be supportive of that greater mission and vision and connect with others? When I develop teams or bring in new members to my teams, I purposely look for people that are very different than me. I'm looking for those folks that have a different strength than each other also. And also looking across sort of generational experience and how can different people with different experiences, whether they are someone with a technical background or perhaps a creative background, how do we bring those people to the table and help them help each other and also help the team, so that when people look at our team, what they see and what they experience is that the problems are solved by a group of people who bring a very different, diverse set of experiences and thought processes. And there's also an art to managing that, because you tend to have people with very strong superpowers in certain areas. And so then they have to learn also how to communicate with one another and learn from one another. And so always trying to manage that pairing of how do we put people together that have those diverse sets of experience and have them create repeated wins. And that's really what makes a team stronger. So, for example, in team meetings, every week we would talk about successes and failures in sort of the same way. I kind of use it as a sports analogy. Your routine stays exactly the same. The content might be different. But every week you're exercising, here was a success, here's what we learned from it, here's the process we used, and that person would present their own or present it at a department level or even to very senior leadership. One of my favorite stories is about a team member I had come in, and the very first day she was on the job, 4 hours later, she was presenting to the executive vice president. We had prepared the deck for her as a team. We walked her through it. She was someone that had a little bit of experience prior in the organization, quite a bit, but had left for a number of years. And she said, well, I don't know if I should be presenting this. And I said, I think you should. You are the new lead in this role, and the rest of us will be there to support you, and I'll be sitting right next to you. And she did an amazing job of presenting that to the senior vice president. It was actually kind of funny because he knew her from before, and he remarked that on her first day of the job, she was already presenting back to him. But there was that trust and confidence that she would do well, and the opportunity there was also for the leadership team to see that any member of this team could succeed and would have the support they needed to sort of shine right from the get-go.
Oh, what a great story. What a great story. I was going to jump back to the human factor. And I remember seeing a woman, my hunch is she's passed away by now. She was quite senior at the time. And she was saying, I'll believe that car manufacturers care about women when they find a place for my purse.
Well, I mean, there were purse hooks designed in some vehicles and bins.
But a purse hook is not necessarily handy when you're trying to find something. And it was just so funny because she was just Joan Rosenberg. I still remember her. I can still see her saying it. It was just such a candid thing, because I thought, my purse usually goes in the belly, if you will, or the foot area of the passenger side, which is fine as long as there's not a passenger there. But it was funny to think about. And I remember a policeman telling me, saying that's the absolute place you do not want to put your purse, because people distract you and then they come in your window. And I'm like, okay, hadn't thought about that. What would be some advice you'd give a student right now who's thinking about going into this or looking to succeed? What would be maybe one or two things you would encourage them to consider in this career path?
I would encourage them to explore it by all means. The COVID-19 crisis has created, I think, some awareness of areas where there's vulnerabilities in supply chains, in particular commodities, whether you look at the healthcare sector or potentially really any industry, manufacturing. Optimization of footprint, where you get your parts from, has been studied and implemented by organizations for decades. But with this pandemic and the way that it shut down manufacturing, really kind of revisiting how is that localization versus globalization going to look for critical components, where can they come from, will there be additional footprints created, looking at the demand and supply chain side, how is that going to continue to work? Are we going to sort of continue the same models that we have in different industries, whether it's automotive or sort of consumer products? There's just so much going on, and there's so much automation involved now and big data that's available that I think that this industry will continue to evolve. I'm a super fan. I think that this supply chain will present so many opportunities for folks that have backgrounds in technical spaces, in data science, in information science, and the business school, of course, et cetera. And sort of that cross-pollination of experience, I think, will bring sort of really innovative and creative solutions to spaces. So I'm a huge fan of the blue ocean strategy, and I think we have a sea ahead of us that is ripe and open for that creativity and for that space for new talent and for existing talent to sort of sit at the table together and think about things in a different way. Definitely a time to consider this area as a great career opportunity. And I would encourage folks that maybe don't have even a specific background in supply chain to begin to consider doing some years of, having some years of experience in this space, because it's very fast paced. There's high demand. There's high impact to the bottom lines of companies. You learn a lot about operations and how to manage people and build teams that have different and sometimes conflicting metrics, and how you bring those people together and really create cohesive teams, whether it's internally or external partnerships that are actually going to be critical for implementing innovation and long-term sustainability of the supply chain pipeline. So I think that the world is supply chain's oyster per se, that there's so much going on in this space. And I would really encourage folks who have passion in that area, whether they're newly out of school or maybe considering a career pivot, to really look at supply chain as a great place to work.
You were mentioning the last downturn of 2006, 7, 8. During those years, I would come to Ann Arbor, and I was speaking at the Ross School of Business for many years, helping the students network. And this was more on the business side than on engineering. But it was interesting to see the number of students in 2007, 2008, when that downturn was happening, particularly 2008, who were losing their jobs even before they had started. And I remember heading out there and they said, oh, I think we're going to have about 40 or 50 people, in your workshop. And I think it's a good thing the fire chief didn't come by, because people were just packed in there trying to figure out how they could pivot after that downturn. It was pretty remarkable to see. And then you're talking about COVID and whatnot here, and now live in Boston. Our governor in Massachusetts did some pretty amazing networking and found PPP and other supplies in China and managed to get the New England Patriots to send their plane over to China to pick that up. From your seat, can you imagine what the moving parts were happening in that? Can you just maybe give us a little bit of an insight? And of course, in Michigan, Tom Brady played there, and he later on played for the Patriots. So here we have this football Michigan, Massachusetts connection. But can you give us what that office must have been like as those calls were taking place, trying to find that?
Well, I can't, I don't want to speak for what might have happened at that office, but I can maybe give you some insight into sort of the challenges that go around having such an excessive, very quick, huge spike in demand. So when you think about, and I'm going to actually do a little bit of a pivot here and provide the analogy to sort of, the toilet tissue issue that we've had recently, right? The demand stays very constant. The forecast stays within a certain bandwidth, and there's a certain capacity that those machines can create. And so when there is an excess demand, there's only so much each industry can do. So, I was extremely proud. I come from manufacturing. I sort of think that sometimes there's this stigma associated with manufacturing that it's not as flexible, it's sort of old school. And we watched all these companies, so many companies, pivot to try to help where the need was greatest for PPE. So when you look at what that picture might have looked like, think about the fact that, let's say there were X numbers of millions of capacity of face masks that were being made in certain countries around the world. And all of a sudden you have a pandemic that is basically moving around the world in, sort of this 6 to 8 week window of where the most critical timing was and what that spike looked like. And every country needs those products, right? The basics of masks, respirators, gloves, etc. And so there's only so much available, because even if you're trying to ramp up, you've got to, without going into too much details, you have to have raw materials and you have to have machines that can make that capacity. And so sometimes there's specific tools that have to be created. You have to have the labor in place. If you're sewing masks, you have to have the materials and the cloth available. And they have to meet a certain specification in order to be at the certification level to be able to use them in a medical environment. So you have all these factors that are compounding. And then the difficulty becomes everybody needs it at once. Company A, who maybe produces 10 million masks a year, now has 50 people trying to outbid each other to get these same materials. And they have difficult decisions that they have to make. Who do they say yes to? Who do they say no to? In what order? In what priority? And then you have, even amongst just in the United States, the different states are also each kind of going out and purchasing their own materials. And are we bidding on the same materials that someone else is, whether they're around the world or within the states or a neighboring country? And so there is a lot of difficulty in managing all of that. And I know it's sort of complicated, but I come from that space, and we talked a lot about how could this look, how could it, be organized. And so you saw some consortiums sort of come up where groups of industries or groups of locations or states or communities would come together to supply. I was really proud to see so many industries and manufacturers who pivoted, reach out and help their local communities. That was like a really great way to show how much industry can care about the greater community and our healthcare workers.
It was remarkable to see the clothing manufacturers now making masks, or, the distilleries making sanitizer. I mean, I think people were drinking plenty of beer, but it was still interesting to see some of those pivots. So you made a career change. Do you want to talk about that and kind of maybe a little bit about what were some of those decisions that made you make those decisions? And, if you're so brave, what's next for you?
First of all, it's a privilege to be here, Diane, with you. You're an inspiration yourself. And one of the things you asked me about was mentors early in my career. I see the world changing rapidly and innovation happening at a pace that we have really never experienced before. And now we have a catalyst, this COVID-19 epidemic that came through that transformed the way we work in the matter of weeks. And that change would never have occurred in that time period. Companies, would have taken years to make that change, if ever, because how would they have all globally aligned, particularly those multinational companies? And so for me, I really wanted to understand better, how does the entrepreneurial space work? How do these companies that come up with innovative solutions that are part of a greater system whole? I think you talked about a puzzle, and I always think about sort of systems in terms of a puzzle, and who are the people, the process, and the products that we need to create a system level solution. So I have a deep love of the mobility space and transportation as it evolves. How is it going to help folks that are maybe challenged in terms of being able to have accessibility to be mobile, to how do we deliver goods and services in a non-contact type of way, and even cashless transactions and how we use our automobiles. I mean, we want an experience now, and we never talked about the automobile being a vehicle experience. I sat in the back of a Gran Torino for 12 hours with vinyl seats when I was young, and my parents were like, entertain yourselves and be creative, right?
No seatbelts for us, yeah.
Yeah, well, we've come a long way, right? And so I am sort of on my own journey, and we'll see where it takes me. But I have been so fortunate to be inside hundreds of companies and meet amazing people like yourself that encourage creativity and innovation and are on the forefront of what's coming next. And tomorrow is today before we know it. So we'll see where this goes.
Sounds so exciting. Well, listen, any parting words or closing thoughts you want to share?
I would say in this time of great stress to recognize that there is an opportunity to make a positive impact. There's already so much fear in the world that if you want to try something different and new, to just go for it. You may succeed or you may fail, but failure is just one more building block of experience. And so there is sort of a badge of honor in being resilient to failure, because people have dozens or sometimes hundreds or thousands of failures before they come upon that one great success. So that's what I would encourage people to do, is just to go out there and do what you can, try something new, be creative, innovative, whether it's in your personal or professional space, and we'll just look forward to a brighter future, one small step at a time.
That's such a great words of wisdom. I remember a commencement address and the line was, to fail is to achieve the unexpected. And I've often cherished that sometimes when I'm in the middle of things, it's not so fun, but it sometimes is an interesting thing to think about. And thank you so much for your time. I look forward to getting to know you better and hearing more about your career and your success. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diane. It's been a privilege.
Take care.